Sissel's pregnancy was already at the very end when one night the kicks suddenly stopped. Later in the hospital, it was discovered that little Jacob had died in Sissel's mother's womb. When Sissel and her husband had their first child, everything went well and the experience was great. Soon, the couple realized that they wanted another child as well. The business began, and after 2 miscarriages, Sissel was finally pregnant again. Ultrasound examinations showed a lovely little boy who was growing well in the womb. Throughout my pregnancy, I was floating in the clouds. I enjoy the thought that I'll soon be a mother of 2 boys, says Sissel. But one night, when the pregnancy was already at the very end, Sissel slept restlessly. She felt that there was no movement in the stomach, although normally the baby was active to move even at night. She called the maternity ward and was instructed to drink juices. She had already done that, no result. Drinking coca or eating candy didn't help either. Sissel was called to come to the maternity ward. When a nurse was found for the first child, Sissel and her husband set off. We were in the car on the way to the hospital. I wasn't worried. I knew it was normal to experience less movement in late pregnancy, Sissel recalls. In the delivery ward, the midwife took a CTG curve. She looked for a heartbeat for a long time until she said she would get help from a more experienced midwife. After they'd been trying to find a heartbeat for 10 minutes, the midwife said it would be better to do an ultrasound. I could see the panic on their faces, and then I realized that my boy in my belly had died, even though no one had said it yet. It was a terrible feeling, says Sissel. The doctor came running, and the ultrasound probe was placed on the abdomen, but the room wasn't filled with the pounding of a little heart. It was completely silent. "Can't you hear anything from there?" asked Sissel. "No, unfortunately nothing. I'm sorry," was the doctor's answer. Sissel says that he cannot properly describe his feelings at that moment. He says that he was paralyzed and couldn't believe what he heard, even though he knew it was true. "I'm hyperventilating. I screamed, I howled, I had an anxiety attack, I panicked. I was scared, I was angry. Above all, I was terribly insecure. What happens next? How are we doing now and in the future?" In the middle of the chaos, they were asked questions. Are you going home and waiting for the birth, or are you going to start the labor now? Do you want an autopsy on your child? I absolutely did not want to go home. I had a dead baby in my stomach, and it had to be taken out. I couldn't wait, says Sissel. The birth started on the same day, 2 weeks before the calculated time, in a regular delivery room in a regular delivery ward, all around ordinary mothers with their living babies. I was shocked that I was going to give birth to a dead child in a normal maternity ward. There were happy parents everywhere, rolling their newborns in cots. It was a painful sight. Even worse was hearing babies' voices. They screamed so intensely, so vividly. My child is not going to scream, Sissel remembers thinking. He received all the pain relief the ward had to offer. Pain relief helped the physical pain, but it didn't make the situation much easier, he says. The birth went on and on. Sissel says it was terribly heavy. In the end, panic struck. I was afraid I wouldn't want to see the baby. I wouldn't be able to look at him right away. I just thought in a panic I would soon have a dead baby in my arms. 10 hours later, Jacob was quietly born into the world. He was placed on his mother's side, as babies usually are. There are no words that can describe my feelings at that moment. I was proud and crushed by sadness at the same time, says Sissel. Jacob Ilias weighed 3,235 grams and was 51 centimeters tall. The parents were allowed to spend 3 hours with Jacob. After that, the priest came to talk with them. Then they put Jacob to bed and walked to a maternity ward. The only thing that separated them from the other new parents was the sheet that was placed over the baby. It was difficult to be among other new mothers, surrounded by happy families, listening to babies cry, says Sissel. In hindsight, this is something he wishes would change, so that other mothers in the same situation don't have to experience the same thing. Shortly after Jacob was born, his grandparents came to visit. Many other close relatives of the family also visited the maternity ward. They had a close family that sticks together even when things are painful and difficult. Only the firstborn was kept away in the hospital. The situation was too difficult to explain to a 2-year-old. When Sissel and her spouse went home from the hospital, they were offered the opportunity to take Jacob home with them. They decided to leave without the child. We had to think of the best for our firstborn. It was really hard to leave Jacob in the hospital with strangers. We walked past happy families, knowing we had left our own child behind. Then I didn't feel any mother's pride in my heart, Sissel describes. Although the firstborn never saw Jacob physically, the parents took many photos of him so that the big brother could see what his little brother looked like. A large photograph of Jacob also decorates the wall of the home's living room. Sissel wanted to organize a perfect funeral for her son. The funeral turned out to be what they had hoped for. There was an almost full church, balloons, flowers, and children's songs. The funeral arrangements taxed Sissel's strength, and he slept badly. There are some days I don't remember anything about. After the funeral, the days were long and heavy. A constant reminder that something is missing, he says. One of the first things Sissel did after returning to the hospital was search for information. He tried to find information about stillbirth online, but he found little. I understand that it's difficult to talk about the subject. Many don't know what to say. The big question that gnaws at the minds of Sissel and her husband is the cause of Jacob's death. Why did Jacob suddenly die in the womb? The parents have had to make several visits to the hospital to get information about the cause of death. They have experienced the visits as distressing. We don't want to be in the hospital. It's been difficult to go there now, in hindsight. It would be good if all the test results could come at once so that there would be fewer visits. Now we have received information in small pieces. We also received some autopsy information without the doctor's explanation, as the discussion time with the doctor was only booked later. It's better to get information and an explanation at the same time so that you don't have to interpret the information alone first, says Sissel. The doctors have said that Sissel and her husband will hardly get an unequivocal answer about the cause of the baby's death. All indications are that an explanation will never be found. It's very difficult for us, but on the other hand, we have learned a lot about everything else that was not the cause of death. That's kind of an answer too. About 25% of the causes of stillbirths remain a mystery. Some people call them very early deaths by hand, says Sissel. When Sissel found out that Jacob was dead, her first thought was that she didn't want any more children. However, my mind changed quickly. But still, he wants to find out about Jacob's death first, to make sure that there was nothing they could have done, because even though Sissel has been told there was nothing she could have done differently to save Jacob, she still feels guilty. No one can replace Jacob, but a new child would be a new opportunity. It would be nice to experience a happy birth. We wouldn't want the firstborn to remain an only child, he says. Both the doctor and the hospital have promised close monitoring of a possible new pregnancy, but no one can guarantee that the same will not happen again. It's really scary. The fact that we would have more children is our only hope, says Sissel. 26-year-old Sissel has always known that she wanted to be a mother. Earlier, she said she wanted 3 children. Now the desired number is 4. 2 more. If I'm still pregnant, I'll definitely get anxious when the baby moves and the due date approaches, she says. After the stillbirth, Sissel and her husband were offered the opportunity to participate in a grief group at the hospital. Sissel had already attended the meetings of the group of those who had lost their children. There, he found a lot of support. It was good to see that we're not alone, he says. She and her husband do grief work in a different way. It has been more difficult for the man to sit down and reflect on the loss. I understand that long-lasting grief can ruin a relationship, but we have a good and solid union, and I strongly believe that we can get through this together, says Sissel. Little by little, life continued, and Sissel began to be ready to look to the future. The key to coping has been Jacob's older brother, the firstborn. Sissel tries to focus on him and hopes to be able to provide a normal life for him and the whole family. Sissel often hears that he is strong. He himself feels that he has survived even in bad times, but considers that he had no real choice. We have a 2.5-year-old son. We can't just lie down and give up, he says. Sharing thoughts and feelings on the blog has also helped. It helps me to tell people about Jacob. I have 2 sons, and I want to talk about them both, Sissel emphasizes. Sissel feels that stillbirth is still taboo. You don't want to think about it, you don't want to talk about it, nor does Sissel in any way want to scare anyone. I'm always afraid that our story will scare other expectants. At Jacob's funeral, one of the guests was suddenly pregnant. I felt it was important to tell him that it's extremely unlikely that the same thing would happen to them as it did to us, he says. Sissel had been told that there was only a 0.1% chance that Jacob would die in utero. If someone asks me how many children I have, says Sissel, I answer that I have two, a living boy and a little angel boy. It's hard to give that kind of answer because it's not what people expect to hear, but it's true.